Thank you. I'm going to step down here because I don't think you'll see the top of my head. Okay, so my name is Laura. I'm Director of Education at Long Island Crisis Center. I did not always do this work. I used to be the Vice President of a bank for a long time. And at 40 years old, I took a break when I had my kids, and I started volunteering at places like the Crisis Center, Winthrop University Hospital and Child Life, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and I saw a very different world than the one I saw from 270 Park Avenue. And I decided to flip my life around, so I went back to school at 40, and I became a crisis counselor, and I've been working at Long Island Crisis Center ever since. So for the past 9 years, I've had the privilege of working with incredible people in schools and meeting students in crisis and for prevention. So that's just a little bit about me. I'm going to be here after if anybody does want to talk a little bit more, but I really want to dive into this because there's a lot to cover. So one of the things I really feel strongly about is we have a lot of information, and if we don't, there are a lot of people that can give it to us. But if we don't have the leadership and the connection with our students, it's really just knowledge. Right? We can't really influence them unless we have that connection with them. So John Maxwell, who's a big leadership guru, who in here knows about John Maxwell? Not too many people. Okay, look him up. He is a big leadership guy. I am part of his team. I've traveled with John to other countries to teach on leadership. And in his flagship book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, he talks about this in chapter 1, the law of the lid. And what he talks about is you could be very effective at your job without leadership. You could be effective. But look what happens when you increase your leadership, which is your ability to influence people. Look at the impact you can have with that. So we all have a cap on how much we can influence. And our cap is based on our leadership ability. So if we increase our leadership ability, we increase the ability to influence people. So to influence this generation, we really need to up our leadership. This is a very private generation. Our Gen Z students are private. They watch the millennials post their life story on Facebook, and they're not going to do it. They like Snapchat. Everything disappears, right? They have lots of different personas that they can create, right? So this is a private generation. If we want to influence them, we have to up our leadership in order to do it. So today, I want you to really focus on this presentation and the rest of the day as being a leader, because that's what you are. We are leading this generation, and I don't know that we're all doing a very good job of it, but I think that we can learn. So today's about connecting and looking at this through the lens of being a leader, because the more you know, the more you can help. And that's why you're all here, and I love to be in audiences like this where people are here strictly to benefit our youth. Right? That's what it's about. So this is our generation. They are the highest diagnosed generation ever known to history. And they know it, right? They know that they are the highest generation diagnosed with anxiety, depression, substance use, suicide, all of it. They know it. They don't want to be, but they know they are. So this alone puts them at risk. Right? Just the fact that they are the highest diagnosed generation puts them at risk when talking about suicide. Median delay in seeking treatment, 10 years. Right? Can you imagine having a physical illness for 10 years and saying, well, I'm just going to see if my broken hip heals itself, or maybe the cancer will go away by itself? We don't do that with physical illnesses, but we do it with mental illnesses all the time. And then what happens very often is another mental illness develops, right? So if I have anxiety that is not getting treated and it's being dismissed, and I have anxiety over time, I can develop depression, and it doesn't replace the anxiety. Now I have depression and anxiety going on within me. And what goes pretty well with that, because that's really hard, right? So enter substance use very often as a way of medicating ourselves, right? Self-medicating. So that's what goes on when we don't address this. But this is part of our generation that we're working with right now. They are stressed. They are very stressed. And they're feeling it from, with anxiety being the #1 diagnosable mental illness with our youth, right? They're feeling it from everywhere. And remember with this generation, they have a post-9/11 memory. They don't ever remember a world that was safe. And they live here in New York, where those planes flew into our buildings right around the corner. They don't know the world before that. Follow that by mass shootings and school shootings and shooting drills done like fire drills. Follow that by the anxiety of their parents, which those of you that are parents, it's not an easy job right now. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear in schools, right? And they're feeling all of this. So when we talk about the stress, Pew Research Center put this out the end of last year. And when we look at mass shootings, 75% of our Gen Z students said that really stresses me out, versus 62% of parents, or no, adults actually. Rise in suicide rate, 62% of our Gen Z students said that really stresses me out, versus 44% of adults. Climate change, global warming, 58% of Gen Z said that really scares me, it stresses me out, versus 51% of adults, right? Separation, deportation of immigrant families, 57% of our Gen Z said that really isn't right, it stresses me out, versus 45% of adults. And widespread sexual harassment and assault, which we heard from Teresa about before, very prevalent. We get calls at the crisis center very often when it comes to sexual assault. 53% of Gen Z students said that really stresses me out, versus 39% of adults. So this is a generation that's very stressed and they feel very deeply. So some stats, the APA, the American Pediatric Association, put this out this year. And they did this survey on stress levels and how they rise during the school year to unhealthy levels, just simply because it's after Labor Day and school is starting, right? The fear that builds up to that, right? Here on Long Island, we have a lot of academic stress. Our students have that in addition to other things. 54% reported stress has no correlation to their physical being. So they're not connecting the dots. Now, New York State last year passed the mental health mandate. So now, K-12, they're seeing the link between mental and physical health, right? But they don't believe that it can really cause them to be sick. With the new mandate, students are learning that if they have a stomach ache, it could be they ate something bad, it could be they're getting a virus, or it could be they have a math test, right? So it could be any of those kinds of things. But look at these numbers. Right? And down on the bottom, 42% reported they are not doing enough to manage their stress. They know they're not. Now, a few weeks ago, I saw over 1,000 students in 4 different schools. And I asked every single class I was with, what are the obstacles that your generation doesn't reach out for help? Because with the millennials, they felt like it was a sign of weakness. They felt weak to reach out for help. This generation doesn't feel weak. They understand mental health a lot more. Here's some of the answers I got from them. One young man said, I'll tell you why we can't reach out for help. We don't have time. I don't have time to find out what your number is and call and see how I feel. I don't have time. I'm on a sports team. I have a job. I'm in AP classes. There's no time for that. A young lady said, it doesn't come natural to us to reach out for help. We're supposed to know how to do it. Right? And I get that, right? They're Long Island high school students and middle school students, and they feel that they should know. But they don't, right? And as other speakers pointed out today, our brain develops from the back to the front. So that frontal lobe, it is not there yet. We are their frontal lobe, if they allow us to. But they do not have that development yet. And we know that, right? It's a scientific fact. If somebody said to you the frontal lobe doesn't develop till 25, you would say, I know. And we know, but do we understand? Because there's a difference between knowing and understanding.
Because if we understood, we wouldn't say to them, but you had to know if you did this, that was going to happen. I mean, why would you make such a ridiculous choice? But we do, right? So this 42% of them said, I want to do something about it, but I don't know what. Now, schools have really risen to the occasion. A lot of schools today are introducing yoga, mindfulness, right? Reminding them not to be in the past, not to be in the future. Let's be where we are right now, because today creates your tomorrow. What you do today is what's going to give you what you're going to get tomorrow. So the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, CDC puts it out every year. This one said this is the most recent, 31.5% of high school students experience persistent feelings of sadness. That's longer than 2 weeks and disabling from doing their normal routine. Or hopelessness. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about hopelessness later, because that is something that we talk a lot about with suicidal thoughts. But 31.5% of our students, that's a really big number. That's a lot of people. And these dominating negative thoughts, right? Another thing I always ask students, we have positive and negative thoughts all day, every day. But usually, one of them dominate our minds. Which ones dominate yours? What do you think they say? What thoughts do you think dominate our students, positive or negative? Negative. And they tell it to you like it's nothing. Negative. I think of the negative stuff all the time. So when they're younger, they use their imagination to be princesses and Power Rangers and superheroes, and brings them to faraway places. They're still using their imagination today, only they're imagining the worst case scenario. Everything going wrong all at the same time. We had a call at the crisis center from a young man. He was 16 years old, and it was in September, and he called at 2:36 a.m. So if you don't know about the crisis center, we have information out there. Lauren is out there. We are a 24/7 crisis intervention agency. We're free, anonymous, and confidential. He called at 2:36 a.m. and he said, I can't breathe. I'm having another one of those panic attacks again. And so the counselor spoke with him. And where do panic attacks come from? They come from these thoughts that they have all the time. So if we're wondering where anxiety is coming from, it's coming from persistent negative thoughts, right? This young man, his thought process was he had a calculus test the next day, and he was going to fail it. And when he did, they were going to pull him out of AP classes. And when they did that, he'd never get to go to the college his father went to, which they talk about him going to all the time. Now, he didn't even take the test yet. But the panic attack was the result of his brain believing that all of that happened, which happens all the time, right? Our brain doesn't know the difference between a lived experience and something that we imagine. Not like that. So his brain released all those powerful endorphins, right? Lots of adrenaline and cortisol, and it put him into a state of panic over a test he didn't even take. But this is what we're seeing. When I see 7th grade students, I ask them, do you know what a panic attack is? Not only do they know, some of them have had them, or their friends have. So younger and younger, we are seeing the results of these dominating negative thoughts. So the negative thoughts can become negative beliefs. Now I believe them. That translates into a negative view of the world, myself, and everything around me, right? Hopelessness is when we don't think anything's going to get better, and we don't think anyone can help us. That's hopelessness. Hopelessness is a feeling that can lead to suicidal thoughts and often does, right? So talking about this negative loop, because that's what it is, right? So if I have enough negative thoughts all the time, I begin to see the negative, right? You know these people, right? You know people that something happens and right away they tell you everything bad about it. They're really good at it. They can like whip it out like that. And then you know people that something happens and they find a silver lining. They find like something good that can come from it, right? So we see through these lenses. When we see through a negative loop, we see things like this. And these are states of mind that people believe, right? So very often before somebody is feeling suicidal, they feel the first one, overwhelm. And overwhelm can be overwhelm of anything. I could be in overwhelming stress, overwhelming anxiety. I could be overwhelmingly depressed. I could be in an overwhelming situation. Maybe somebody I sent a sexually suggestive picture to, sent it to their friend, and I am in a bad spot right now. But no matter where it's coming from, I'm overwhelmed. That means I have never felt like this in my life. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know who to call. Do you think most students reach out for help when they feel overwhelmed? No way. And they tell me that all the time. So let's say I'm that student. I don't reach out for help. I don't do anything. I don't change anything. You know what I do? I hope life gets better tomorrow. And most of the time, life gets better. Something happens, I shift my thoughts, and I feel better. I don't have to do anything. But if that doesn't happen, and I stay in overwhelm long enough, and anxiety long enough, I could feel helpless. And helpless means I don't think I can help myself. I don't know who to call. I don't know what to change. I think I'm in over my head. I don't think I could help myself. But here's the important thing to know about when somebody's feeling helpless. They will still take help from you. They just don't think they can do it. So if you're seeing a student feeling helpless, saying things like, I can't do it, it's bigger than me, or my life is always like this, I never know what to do, there's no one I can talk to, that could be helplessness, right? So that's a great time to make a connection with that person. Because when somebody's helpless, it's very interesting. They want to give up, but if you try to help them, they get hope again, right? So helpless is a place where we can still really reach somebody. The longer I feel helpless, and again, that could change, right? Any moment, if I'm feeling helpless, something can happen, shift my thoughts, I feel better. But if it doesn't, and I keep feeling helpless, I can go to worthless. And worthless comes because being in helpless, I feel like I don't know what to do. I'm not enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not big enough. I'm not enough. I can't work through stress. Stress is bigger than me. I create a story in my head that says, I can't cope with this. It's too big. It's too much. I'm not big enough. And worthlessness, again, can turn to hopelessness, right? And hopelessness, who do I think can help me now? If I'm feeling hopeless, who can help me now? Nobody. Thank you. Nobody. So let's just think about what that looks like, okay? Nobody can help me. Hopeless is where your whole thought process starts to change. In hopeless, I lose sight of the big picture, right? My thinking goes into this little box. And the only thing I'm thinking of in here, and this generation's very good at overthinking, I am overthinking every single one of my stressors, over and over and over. I lose sight of the big picture. This is all I focus on, what's in here. And that's enough to cause a lot of emotional pain. And emotional pain is really hard because nobody else sees it, but I feel it all the time. Nobody asks me if I'm okay. Nobody acknowledges it. I try to deal with it all by myself. So if I'm in this hopeless box in my mind, the longer I spend in this box, the higher my risk goes that I might think of suicide. And it's not because I want to die. It's because this hurts so much that I just don't want to feel it anymore. And sometimes we get stuck in these thoughts in here, in hopeless. And distorted thinking, illogical thinking starts to happen, right? Things like this. Laura, your life is always going to be like this, so just get used to it because this is going to be hard. I don't know how you're going to do it. Now, is that true? Stepping out of the box, is life ever going to always be the same way? No, and our students know that. And when I speak to them on suicide prevention, I ask them that, is that true? And they say, no, life is not always going to be the same way. No, it's not. But if you're in here, you could really believe that. Okay? You know another illogical piece of thinking that happens in this box? Everyone that loves me is going to be better off without me because I just bring them down. Now, stepping out of the box, is that ever going to be true? Is it ever going to be true that people that love you are going to be better without you? Never. But in here it does. So if you're talking to somebody who's feeling suicidal and you bring up their family or their friends and they say, you don't get it, they're going to be better without me, I just bring them down all the time. They believe that. So if you say to them, oh, that's not true, or oh, I know your mother, or it's not going to do anything, right? But that's the time to say to them, in Hopeless, your brain could trick you into thinking that. But we can't believe everything we think. It's just not true. It's not because I know your mother. It's not because of all those things. It's because let's get factual right here. That's simply not true, right? But they're going to believe that. So in this Hopeless box, it's dark outside of here, right? And if just one person could come and poke a hole in this box, just for a second, I could see outside and I would see some light out there. Because everything is outside this box. Nobody went away. My family and friends didn't leave me. They're all still there. It's me that went away. In my mind, I'm in here. And that's why last year, I was in 5 schools after a loss of a student by suicide. And I sat with their friends in these 5 different schools, 5 different times. And these friends cried and said to me, I was a bad friend. I thought I was a good friend, but I know now I'm not. Because if I was, this would have never happened. One of them said, I should have believed her. She said something like this before. You know, and suicide is never somebody's fault. You know, it's a personal choice somebody makes when in that moment they don't think they have any other choices to make. It's never somebody's fault. And that's really confusing to our students too, because, you know, in cases recently where people were charged, right? The case in Massachusetts where a young lady was charged because her ex-boyfriend called her and said he was going to kill himself, and she told him to do it. Okay, so students get confused with that. Again, you know, that lobe is not, we think they should know all this, but that's not talking about suicide responsibly, right? But it's never somebody's fault. It isn't, you know. But trying to talk to 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds, that it wasn't their fault. Talk about trauma, right? Now they're left with mental health challenges. There was a young girl who died by suicide here on Long Island 2 years ago. I met with her friends a few months ago. And there's mental diagnoses for 3 of these girls, right? So education on all of this. Now, this Hopeless box, you're not going to see that they're in it. It's not visible, right? So one of the things I've always said to my own kids is, no matter how much I love you or want to protect you, there's one thing I'm never going to be able to do. I can't get in your head to know what you're thinking. You are the leader of your life in your thoughts, not me. I'm not going to know them. So unless you share them, unless you know that these thoughts are bringing you to a dark place, unless you're aware of it, you might not share them. So that's why education is so important, because our students are the first line of defense. Students tell a peer before they tell me, you, or anybody else. They're going to tell a friend. Sometimes not a friend, sometimes a person who has a locker next to them. They're going to say something, but it's not going to be an adult. So it's really important to give students suicide prevention types of education. But in Hopeless, you know, there's this whole myth that suicide is selfish, and it came from this, right? Like, don't they care about their family, their friends, the people that love them? How could they do such a thing? Right? Did you ever hear that myth? It's out there all over. Even students hear it. And suicide is not selfish. I've never met one selfish person who felt suicidal. They truly believe that they're bringing everybody else down, right? And so that's a really important piece to remember. When somebody's feeling suicidal, and you know, we're focusing today on youth, but it is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. It's a very underreported death number, 47,173. It's really a lot more than that. And most of the time, deaths by suicide are not reported that way. But one of the things we have to remember with students especially is that you want to hear their story, right? What's going on that's bringing you to these feelings? What's happening? And listen intently when they tell you that. And when somebody's focused on death and they really believe that the only way out of their situation is death, it's very hard for you to say, promise me you're not going to do anything now, that you're going to be okay now, that you're going to be better, right? It's very hard. So one of the things we use, and it's in a training that I do a lot, is we say, keeping you safe for now, right? So when I'm not asking you to stay safe for the rest of your life, and not just with students, if you're ever with a family member, a friend, an older person, it could be any age, focusing on keeping you safe for now is much more manageable in their mind than promise me you're never going to do anything again, right? So hearing their story and pulling from their story, even if it's just uncertainty, because there's ambivalence when there's suicidal thoughts. There's always, always ambivalence. And I know that because we get calls on the hotline all the time. You know, we had a call last week from somebody that was actually standing on the bridge, but called the suicide hotline on the pole right next to them. There's ambivalence always when there's suicide, right? And so we want to speak to that, even if it's just uncertainty, right? We answer the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at the Crisis Center. And whenever we talk to somebody that's feeling suicidal, we always have that piece. You called here. That says that there's a part of you that wants to live. So can we put together a plan to keep you safe for now? And then in that plan is resources and people that they're going to talk to, or maybe a place they're going to go to, or maybe we send mobile crisis out to them right now, right? But we want to hear their story. And there's a lot of panic when we talk about suicide, and I know, and I heard the police officer talk about his son. I had to ask my own son if he was feeling suicidal. It was one of the hardest things I ever did. My husband said, "Are you kidding me? He's not suicidal." I said, "He has every warning sign, and I'm not going to ignore them." He said, "Laura, that's ridiculous." But you know what? I had to ask that question. And he had thought about it. He told me he would never do it, but he had thought about it. And I was able to open up that conversation. So nobody is immune to this. Nobody is immune to this. And it doesn't mean somebody is not a good parent, right? I've seen too many really good parents have students that, you know, turn to drugs and alcohol and were feeling suicidal or even died by suicide or made choices that weren't what their parents taught them. It doesn't mean that they're not a good parent, right? It never means that. A lot of parents have very difficult times because they do believe that that's what it means, right? And then what happens is we get caught up in, I wasn't a good mother, because if I was a good mother, that would have never happened. And then I'm stuck in the hole with my kid because I'm, poor me, not a good mother. I can't help him like that. I can't help him if I'm in the hole with him. So getting out of that and just looking at the situation, but listening to their story, it's so important. This is a story, when somebody's feeling suicidal, this is a story that they probably shared with no one. And it's been created in their head. And so when they share it with you, it may not sound like it makes a lot of sense. But that's okay. It's not going to make sense to you. And I had a male at a school once where I did a professional development. I don't know who he was. But he raised his hand and he said, "The one thing I don't understand is our students are feeling suicidal over little things. Like, I don't get it." And I said, "Little things? To who? To you? It's a little thing?" Because I would guarantee you it's not little to them. When you overthink a situation, it could be anything. If you overthink it enough, it becomes so much bigger in your head than it is in real life, but you believe that part in your head. That's what you see. So perception is reality, and that's really important when talking to youth and they're feeling like this. If they're feeling depressed, if they're feeling anxious, you might think it is ridiculous. Guess what? It doesn't matter what you think. It matters what they feel and how they see it, right? Because again, it's the lens that we all look through. 17.2% of high school students seriously considered attempting suicide in 2017. That's a big number. So what does that mean, the youth risk behavior study? It means that they thought about how they would kill themselves, but they didn't have a plan. 17.2% of our high school students. 13.6 made a plan. These are big numbers. Right? We had a high school student who called our hotline in March, and he got the number from a workshop we did in his school. He called in March. He was suicidal. He had a plan. He was going to take the pills, which he accumulated from several people's homes that he went to visit, grandparents, aunts and uncles, a little bit here and a little bit there. He was going to take that bottle of pills that night. And he called the hotline first. And he spoke to the counselor for over an hour and a half. And he decided to give himself another chance. But you know what? We only have the information they give us. And so we didn't know what happened. In September of this year, that young man called the hotline again. He asked to speak to the same counselor. And he said, I had to call this number back because I was going to be dead. And instead, I'm back with my girlfriend and I'm captain of my team. And I would have never known my life could have gotten good again. That was the best call we ever had. And it just goes to show, they don't have the experience to know that life could get so bad that it hurts so much, and then it could get good again. They don't know it. They didn't have it, right? So it's hard when we're talking with them and we know it, and we want to say to them, but it's okay, you know what, it's going to get better. That stuff won't really help, right? What does help is to be face-to-face with them. Whatever it is they say they feel. Feel it with them. Have the empathy to feel it with them. It could be a bad breakup. Maybe you didn't like the person at all anyway, right? So maybe you're secretly pretty happy over this. But you know what? They're not. So it's so critical to connect with them, right? We have lots of time to correct them. We don't get points for correcting, but we get lots of points for connecting, right? Don't miss these opportunities. When there are times of struggle, those are the opportunities to connect. Those are the times we don't want to miss. So what can we do? We're seeing depression and anxiety rise. We're also seeing suicide and self-harm and drug use rise. So this rise in suicide calls for fierce education, not just education anymore. Like, we have to be the models for them, right? We have to share with them. We have to connect with them. This generation is a very highly connected generation through social media. They're living in a hyper-connected world, but yet they lack connection, human connection. So risk factors, warning signs, everybody should know them. It's needed now more than ever. So let's talk about some. So risk factors. Risk factors are characteristics, situations, right? That's the difference between risk factors versus warning signs. So risk factors, depression, anxiety, or other mental health disorders. We saw in the beginning of this is the most diagnosed generation we've seen. So that is already there. A family history of suicide. Now, some people think that if somebody dies by suicide in their family and they see how hard it was for everybody else, that they would never do it, but it's the opposite of that. Okay? So substance use, misuse, trauma. We heard about trauma before. They self-blame. It doesn't matter what's happening. Even if I'm a child and I'm being abused, and as my father is beating me, he's saying, Laura, this is your fault because you're so annoying to your mother. If you weren't so annoying to your mother, I wouldn't have to do this. So guess what? I believe I'm pretty darn annoying. I don't know why I'm annoying. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. But it must be bad for my father to have to do this to me. So yes, we self-blame. And this generation is very self-critical. Social isolation or being bullied. So the American Pediatric Association came out in 2017 and said bullying is a mental health challenge. And not just the person being bullied, but the person who is bullying, okay? Because that person needs power so badly in their life that he's going to take it from somebody else, or she's going to take it from somebody else. And so what happens typically in schools when bullying is founded, the person bullying is usually suspended or detention of some sort, and then they come back to school and we expect them to be different, right? The person who is being bullied sees the school social worker, gets out of class early, is the one that has to have the special types of things done for them. But really, it's the person bullying, right? When that person comes back from suspension, why aren't they seeing the school social worker or school counselor, guidance counselor, or somebody to talk about their behavior or what caused it? or how to help them, right? So they learn that power comes inside of you. You can't get power from somebody else. It won't be sustainable. You'll have to keep doing it, right? And there are people that do that. And that's where we see abuse and sexual assault, because people think they could have power over someone else. So helping people that bully. Loss of any kind. It could be a pet. It could be the parents getting divorced. It could be the loss of anything that's important to them. Starting or changing medication, that's important because a lot of our students are on medication. And these are brain-altering drugs. Low self-esteem, right? That's self-image. From these negative beliefs, these negative stories, can easily come a low self-image, right? I don't think I can get through it. So when we talk about being resilient, you know, I love when people say kids are resilient. Nobody is just resilient, right? We learn to be resilient. We learn through experiences. But this generation is having difficulty assessing risk because they don't take much of it, right? Risk is taken away at every chance it can so that nothing could go wrong, right? I'm a parent. I have 2 millennials and I have a Gen Z. And so the nickname for parents for millennials, anybody know? Remember? The helicopter parents, because we hover, you know? The nickname for Gen Z are the snowplow parents, because they clear the path so that nothing and no obstacles can get in the way. And because of that, they really have difficulty evaluating risk of any kind. So we see stunted maturity in our students, right? We see stunted maturity. We see high schoolers acting like middle schoolers. We see college students acting like high school students. We see adolescents now having transitional adolescence, right, up to age 25, right? So we see all of this. Lack of support, struggling with sexual orientation in an environment that's not respectful of it, right? These are all, and there are more, but these are the most known that we see risk factors. Now looking at warning signs, talking or posting, or even just saying, I want to die. What does hopelessness sound like? If you're talking to a student, hopelessness might sound like this: you don't get it. My life isn't going to get better. It's always been like this. It's always going to be like this. You don't understand. My problems are different. Nobody can help me. And they really believe that. So hopeless language is something to pay careful attention to when you hear people speaking as if there's no hope for anything to get better. Also feeling trapped. Some students refer to it as that as well. Increasing drugs and alcohol. Somebody saying, I can't deal with this. And self-harm can be included in that as well. Substance use and self-injury are 2 very quick ways of regulating emotions. I feel like this, I don't want to. I want to feel different, and I want to feel different really fast. So I could use a drug to do it, or I could self-harm. And if I self-harm, my body releases endorphins that calm me, and I actually feel calmer. Right? For people that use self-injury, it works like a drug. Changes in weight, appearance, sleep habits I have to take off. Our students don't sleep. I mean, it's hard to tell when they have good sleep or not. Gathering or having access to the means. So are there medications easily within reach? In your medicine cabinet, in your drawers? Sometimes they go to grandma's. If somebody is looking to accumulate medication, they will be looking in places like that. Is there a gun in the house? Is it locked? All of that's important. Isolating themselves. Searching online for methods of suicide. There was a death by suicide not long ago here on Long Island, and one of his friends said to me, I have to tell somebody, like, he was looking online and I knew it. I just didn't think that they meant it. And this is another problem, is that suicide is thrown around. I'm going to kill myself. KYS, kill yourself, shortcutted in a text message, KMS, right? So students don't know. That's the number one question I get in schools. How do I know when they mean it? That's what they ask me. How do I know when they mean it? Well, if they're saying it, I would say you treat it like they mean it. Oh, well, I can't do that all the time. And I get that, right? I was in a school last year, and you know those big high schools where they're like 2,100 people, and the bell rings, and you're walking like this through the hallway, and I'm down here, and they're all up there, and I'm going like this. And these two girls at the lockers were having a conversation, and one girl said to the other girl, I have 5 tests tomorrow. Kill me now, because you know I'm going home to kill myself tonight. So what do? I pivot, and I go over to the locker, and I said, excuse me, I didn't mean to overhear you, but I have to ask you, are you feeling suicidal? And she looked at me like I had 10 heads. I said, what? Are you kidding me? I don't know why you would even ask me that question. That's ridiculous. No, I'm not suicidal. And I said, okay, well, I'm asking you because I heard what you said, and I'm a crisis counselor, and I was doing some work in your school today, and I couldn't leave here without knowing you were okay. And then she turned to her friend and she said, tell her I'm not suicidal. Tell her I would never do that. And I said, I'm happy to hear that you would never do that. But I can't leave here with you saying that and me not talking to you about it and giving you the hotline number. And so I'm hoping that maybe next time she's completely stressed out, because I do think she was, that maybe she'll use other language. Maybe she'll think, is that lady here that's going to totally embarrass me? I don't know, but I'm hoping that she changes her language, because we have to change language. And when I speak to students, I ask them to be part of that change. That when they hear students talking about killing themselves, that they ask them, they say, are you really feeling suicidal? Can I help you? And it's hard for them because they know that it's being thrown around. But until we can change that culture, it's going to be hard to know. Calling and saying goodbye, remember me, giving away possessions, risk-taking or self-destructive kinds of behavior, right? Driving erratically, not really caring. Those are all warning signs, and there are more. Basically, with warning signs, we're looking for a change in behavior. What are they doing now that they didn't do before? And again, you're not going to know this if you don't have a connection to that child or to that student. How are you going to know if there's a change in behavior if you don't have that connection? Connection is so critical when it comes to this. So protective factors, there are always protective factors too. I had a man once, I was speaking at an event, and he came up to me and he said, my wife killed herself at Christmas, and I have 3 girls, and I know that they're going to do it too. You got to help me. I don't know what to do, because I looked it up, and if somebody you love dies by suicide, the odds are you will too. I don't know what to do. And I looked at him and I said, here's what's amazing about that. Well, after I validated and spoke to him about his wife, I said, what's amazing about that is that you're aware of it. And so you being aware of it, you are now a protective factor for your students, so that, for your children, so that you can now help them in the right way. So access to treatment for mental health as much as physical health, right? How do they think you feel about mental health and about them? How do you think this generation thinks you feel about them? Because I'll tell you this, you wear it on a name tag, right? So like if I think this generation is doomed, you know what my name tag says? Hi, I'm Laura. I think your generation is doomed. So are you going to talk to me? Are you going to come to me? Right? So we have to let them know we believe in them. We have to let them know that they're not doomed, that they are amazing, and that they're capable of so much. And we have to let them know that we have mental health professionals in our schools and in the community. Right? Let them know there are people out there to help them. Family and community support connection. That valuable piece of connection. How do you connect with youth? I've met teachers that said to me, you're going to have to help me with that one because I don't know how to connect to this generation. They're really hard to connect to. But you could connect with them on anything. Ask them a question about an app on their phone. Ask them what their favorite apps are. If they're wearing a shirt that says Montauk, ask them about Montauk, right? Pay attention and those little moments. If they're not themselves, ask them about it. Tools for coping, problem solving, all of these things. Problem solving is what builds resiliency, right? They solve problems for their friends all the time, right? They're the problem solvers for their friends. But when the problem is theirs, usually somebody else figures it out. But if we can teach them conflict resolution, and if we can teach them how to solve problems in healthy ways, it builds resiliency. Tools for coping and emotional regulation. Do you share your coping with your your students or your children or youth in general? Right? I mean, that's a question, because it's really important that they know that you have to cope too, right? So do you share? Do you ever say, you know what, I spent extra time at the gym today because I was so stressed I just needed the extra time to work out? Or I made cookies and brownies because I just was stressed out and I wanted to follow a task to just kind of clear my mind for a little while. Let them know that you cope and how you cope, and ask them how they cope. Right? What do they do when things feel stressful? Those are great, conversation starters for them and for you. Because coping is really important, and this generation tends to binge watch Netflix and YouTube, okay? And they will do it over and over and over. Or sometimes they'll binge watch these shows that are like, don't really have meaning to them, I guess you could say, but it kind of just distracts them. And sometimes distraction is good. Sometimes if we distract ourselves enough, we take a break from the problem, we go back to it, we feel better. Sometimes distraction's good. But when you see someone constantly distracting, right, constantly on YouTube, constantly distracting, it could be something that they have to talk about. Could be something a little bit deeper. Cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, okay? Again, I come from an Italian family. Suicide is a sin, right? So if that's my belief and I wear it on my name tag, hi, my name is Laura, suicide's a sin, I think it's wrong. Are you going to tell me if you're feeling that way? No. Here's what happens when we tell people that we could talk about suicide. They tell us how they feel. I was at a 4-year college here on Long Island this year. When I did suicide prevention, I talked about that box. I had a young man in the middle of the class that said to me, I'm in that box right now, how do I get out? Now, what if we weren't talking about it? He didn't know about the box before that. Talking about suicide responsibly. Talk to them about the rise. They know about it. I'll tell you, they know about it. And not only do they know about it, they've probably talked to somebody who felt this way. Ask them about it, right? How do you feel about the rise in suicide? What do you think about it? Adapting a growth mindset, that's also resilient building, right? Here's the growth mindset. The growth mindset says, I'm not good in math. Oh, you're not good in math yet? Do you want to be good in math? I'm not fat. No, you don't want to be good in math? I'm not fast enough. You're not fast enough yet? Do you want to get faster? What could we do to get you faster, right? Let them know that there's no such thing as a fixed mindset. You're not good in something and bad in something else. You could be good in anything you want to be good in. They don't know that. And that's what leaders do. Leaders bring out greatness in others. And when I talk to students about bullying, and I talk to them about leadership, and I say leaders bring out greatness in other people, what do you do to bring out greatness in your classmates? And they look at me, they go, I don't know how to do that. And in the beginning I didn't understand it, but what I learned from them is nobody brings out the greatness in them. So if nobody's bringing out the greatness in them, how do they know how to do it for somebody else? And in listening to them, I feel like it's true, right? We're telling them what they need extra help in. We're ignoring the 90s and going right to the 70s or the 60s and saying, what's with this grade? We're telling them all of the things that they need to get better at and not what they're good at. So to connect, a great way to connect is to find a strength in somebody and let them know you see it. I saw you talking to your friend the other day and she was really upset. You seem like you're a really good friend. I saw you the other day. You gave somebody a pen when they didn't have it. That was a really nice thing you did. And I know we live in really super busy worlds, but connection takes time and it's worth every second of it. Resources. Being aware of resources, giving them hotlines, letting them know there's a place to call, that they don't have to say who they are. Sometimes we're not going to be the person. And when you're a parent, that's a hard pill to swallow because you don't want anybody else being that person. And when you're a teacher or you're somebody else, you feel very protective over your students. But the most important thing is that they're talking to someone, right? It doesn't matter who. So we see the part of them that's above the water. We see the result of everything that's under the water. So the truth is not always in the appearance of things. As a matter of fact, it's rarely in the appearance of things. When we connect and we talk deeper, we get to underneath the iceberg. But really, all we see is what's on top. And the character building is all that's underneath. And we have to seek to understand, to have the empathy, to really care to know what's underneath. How often do we do that? How often do we see the emotion when a student comes to us hysterical and we think they're overreacting or we don't really have time? It's not about what we're seeing. It's what's deeper than that. Because guaranteed there were lots of things that happened before they came to you crying. But we have to seek to understand to know what it is. So that's what I got. I want to thank you all for being here and for caring enough to spend your day to learn how to do more and to help our youth. My heart is with every one of you in this room today. I love being at events like this just because I feel like I'm in my living room with people that care as much as I do. So I thank you for that. You are a protective factor. However, all of our knowledge that we get, that we have, is useless if we're not connecting with them and we're not influencing them. That's the critical piece that's a part of everything.